Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending this course. I'm Rosalind Bandy. I'm the Vice President of Sustainability for TLMI. And thanks for being here for this course on responsibly sourcing fiber. I want to especially thank our sponsors for this course, Appion, Avery Dennison, Maxus, and Wausau Coated Products for helping to offset the cost and make this a free course for all attendees. And I guarantee it will be jam-packed, full of information. Our teachers today are experts in their field from the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. If you look on your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see that there is a handout available. You're welcome to download that from the control panel, and that is yours to keep. And as is typical in these types of webinars with lots of people, you will all be muted during this course. However, we are going to have some time at the end for questions and answers. So as our teachers go through their presentations, if you have a question, please type it into the question box. And at the end, we will address as many as we possibly can. So this is a 1-hour course. We will be ending at 2 o'clock. And now I'd say let's get it started. Alyssa and Tom, take it away.
All right, so welcome to the Essentials of Sourcing Fiber, which is a deep dive into the topic of responsible fiber sourcing. Before we get started, I just want to briefly introduce myself and then give Tom a chance to introduce himself. My name is Alyssa Harbin. I am a project manager at the Sustainable Packaging Coalition. My background is in packaging and packaging science. I have a PhD in packaging science from Michigan State University, and I'm really excited about the work that we get to do and getting to talk to all of you through this course today. So Tom, would you like to introduce yourself?
Excellent, thanks Alyssa. Yeah, hello everyone, my name is Tom Pollock. I'm the Director of Member Engagement at Green Blue, which includes the Sustainable Packaging Coalition. My background in the last 10 or so years has been in forest products. So while I'm focused on member engagement now at Green Blue, I've been working with companies all across the supply chain in forest products, including a start in forest certification. So it's come a long way, responsible sourcing and forest certification, and we're really glad to share with you what we've learned and what our course in sustainable sourcing fiber can offer. So thanks again, and looking forward to your questions at the end.
All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing my camera just to make sure that the webinar doesn't take up too much bandwidth as I go to the slides, which I know just disappeared. 1 second, let me get those back up. Can you see them again?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just to get started, a little bit about this course and the Sustainable Packaging Coalition. We are a member-based collaborative that believes in the power of industry to make packaging more sustainable. And we're very excited to be here and bring you this course. And today's course will cover 3 key topical areas. First, I'll do a brief introduction to responsible forest management, why it matters and what we mean by that terminology. Then Tom will do a deeper dive into forest certification, and then I'll wrap up by briefly discussing recycled fiber before we get into your questions. So, forests thrive in diverse climatic regions throughout the world. Boreal forests found in Canada and Russia, temperate forests found in the United States, parts of Asia, South America, Africa, and Australia, and tropical forest types found along the equator are a variety of the different types of forests on the earth. The top 5 countries with the most forested area, as you can see on the map, include Russia, Brazil, Canada, the United States, and China. And around 93% of that forest is natural forest, and about 7% of that is planted forest. but you can see the distribution that there is a lot of forest in a variety of different areas on the globe. And so what values do forests provide? The global prominence of forests signifies the scale of the impact that forest ecosystems can have environmentally, socially, and economically. And responsible forest management is all about helping forests be able to continually provide these services that are valuable to people and to the earth. So first, briefly touch about the social services, which are of cultural value to a lot of different people. These social services include cultural heritage, so defining unique cuisines by foods that are only found in some forest, art, music, history, language, and medicines. Also in many places, like in the United States, generations of families have cared for and lived off of the same forest land, making that forest a central part of family identity as well as culture. There's spiritual and religious value in forests. Forests have spiritual significance for many indigenous groups that use forest sites and products in religious ceremonies and tradition, and also in recreation. Forests provide opportunities for outdoor recreation and tourism that is critically important to many regions in the world. So ecotourism can include things like hunting, hiking, fishing, bird watching, camping, all those great activities. Then a lot of the services that we're going to be focusing on today are the environmental services that forests provide. These include clean water. Forests serve as an important source of water storage for agriculture and drinking water by grounding water in their roots and biomass. They also provide water purification, filtering pollutants and runoff from natural and human sources. Globally, forested watersheds and wetlands supply and purify about 75% of the world's accessible fresh water. Forests also provide climate regulation. Forests help regulate local and global weather patterns that provide rainfall and prevent drought. They absorb and store carbon in their biomass and soil and serve as the largest global storehouse of carbon on land. The ocean is the largest on Earth. They cool and filter air, catching dust, ash, pollen, and smoke in their leaves, which can greatly improve local air quality around the forests and improve public health. Reckless deforestation around the world accounts for about 15% of global emissions, which is more than the transportation industry for reference. Another environmental service forest provides is erosion control. Forests help create fertile soil, and their tree roots and biomass hold it in place. Erosion occurs after deforestation when the soil is washed away, resulting in a loss of topsoil for agriculture and desertification of the area. About half of the world's topsoil has been lost to erosion, according to the Rainforest Conservation Fund, and deforestation is a direct cause of most of that topsoil loss. The final environmental service we're going to touch on briefly is the service of providing habitat. Forest lands are vital in maintaining habitat for plants and animals. 80% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity live in forest. Deforestation and forest degradation can cause biodiversity to decline. When forest cover is removed, wildlife no longer has a habitat and is vulnerable to negative impacts from both hunting and climate change. And then finally, economic services are another reason forests are so valuable. 2/3 of global forests are considered to be working forests, which are forests that are actively managed to generate revenue from multiple sources. This includes sustainably produced timber and other ecosystem services. Working forests play a critical role in the global economy, providing key material inputs to society as well as employment. And these forests can be both small, family-owned, or large-scale commercial forests. We use these forest products in our everyday lives. As you are all well aware, fiber is an important component to packaging and labeling. Wood products such as lumber also is a forest product that's used in our daily life. along with many other products. And approximately 14 million people worldwide are formally employed in the forest sector. Many more depend directly on forests and forest products for their livelihood outside of direct employment. So in all, forests contribute to the livelihoods of 1.6 billion people worldwide. And so these are just some examples of pulp and paper products used in packaging. And this type of application for pulp and paper is around 40% of all of the wood harvested for industrial use. So we know that what we do as the packaging and labeling industry can have a significant impact on how forests are managed and encouraged to thrive. So fiber-based packaging plays a large portion of this packaging, but it's also some other materials as well. And each type of this paper and paper-based packaging uses varies amount of virgin pulpwood and recycled fiber. So now that we've briefly touched on some of the reasons forests are so valuable, we need to talk about responsible management and how forests can be kept to keep providing those valuable services. So when working forests are responsibly managed, they produce fiber to meet the demands of growing populations while also maintaining a healthy forest that continues to provide those services. And so it's important for us to recognize that forests can be harvested for trees and lumber for those forest products in ways that do not have to lead to deforestation. It can be done in healthy and responsible ways. When trees are rotated in harvesting, so trees are harvested in a rotational pattern to allow more regrowth than cutting. This can help keep forests healthy and thriving. And when responsible forest management plans are correctly implemented, harvesting trees can actually help maintain health and resilience of the forest by regenerating some new life and opening up new spaces for habitat and healthy levels of reforestation. Responsible forest management, as we define it for the rest of this presentation and as it's used as terminology in the industry, is forest management that is environmentally sound, socially just, economically viable, and that can help meet society's needs without depleting natural capital. So some examples of responsible forest management include sustainable harvesting levels and regeneration, protection of biodiversity, protection of water and soil, protection and respect for workers and local communities, and assurance of legal frameworks to protect the forest. This might bring to mind some of the concept of the 3 pillars of sustainability: economic, social, and environmental considerations. In order for something to be sustainable, those 3 pillars are also included in responsible forest management. Some examples of what responsible forest management does not include would be forest conversion to non-forest uses, natural forest conversion to tree plantations, clearing in ecologically vulnerable or valuable areas, or illegal production of wood products. So looking at the data around global forest loss, it illustrates the importance of responsible forest management. There have been net loss of forest over the past 300 years, but starting around 30 years ago, that net loss has slowed. And in more temperate forests in the very northern part of the northern hemisphere or the southern part of the southern hemisphere, there's actually been some net gain in forest cover due primarily to more responsible forest management practices and efforts to regain some of that forest land. However, while the rate of forest loss has slowed since the peak in the 1980s, you can see that it's still way too much that is being lost every year, and deforestation remains concerning. Even if the rate has changed slightly, this is still obviously an area where a lot of forest is being lost, and we can work to do better. So forests in the US and Canada are low risk due to strong legal frameworks and sustainable industry practices, and that has led to some of that forest regeneration in temperate forests. But there's many countries around the world that do not have the same strong legal frameworks or enforcement practices, and that can lead to high risk logging in those areas. So industry best practices have seen vast improvements in forest management techniques. In earlier years, loggers had less training in sustainable forest practices, but today that training from forest scientists has been more widely implemented to consider long-term planning for harvest sustainability. And there's actually more trees in the US and Canada than there were 100 years ago. But in many places, this is not the case. Just because we don't have as many risks due to logging does not mean our forests in North America face no risks. We and the forest in North America still face risks from invasive species, diseases, and fires. Many of these are exacerbated by climate change and global trade. So can't forget that while it might be low risk, it's not no risk. But these risks can be minimized with continued emphasis on sustainable forestry practices to work towards prompt reforestation, minimize chemical use, and protection of key habitats. Oops. So looking at some of the annual change in forests, this is the most recent data we could find from 2015, looking at net change in forest area. You can see that most, not all, but most of the loss of forest happens in tropical regions. These tropical forests contain a significant amount of the world's biodiversity and play a large role in carbon sequestration. And so their loss has a very significant global environmental and social impacts, and climate change is presenting further stresses and exacerbating the impacts on these forests. And if we look at deforestation specifically and not just forest loss, you can see the areas where deforestation has occurred, or it's even more clear that it's around the equator. And many countries in these areas do not practice responsible forest management through enforcement of a strong legal system that enforces the laws that are in place to protect the forests, which means there is risk involved in sourcing from these areas if the goal is to produce fiber-based products sustainably. So the three big risks for sourcing in these areas are legal risks, environmental risks, and reputational risks. Legal risks can include jail time for illegal logging, as well as fines and other penalties. Environmental risks we've talked about with all of the benefits to the environment that forests provide. If you remove the forest, those benefits go away, and there are huge ripple effects on ecosystems. And then finally, there's reputational risks, which can lead to companies that are linked directly to deforestation and forest loss to have difficulty overcoming that negative publicity. And so these risks all have consequences for brands. You can make pledges to help reduce those risks, and there's many different kinds of pledges that are available that different companies make. First is zero deforestation, which means no forest areas are cleared or converted at all. Then there's zero net deforestation, which allows for some clearance or conversion of forests in one area as long as another area of equal size is replanted. And then there's zero net deforestation and forest degradation, which is similar, but also requires that there's no overall loss in forest quality. While these changes or these pledges are all designed to prevent the increased amounts of change in forest area, it's important to note that they all mean slightly different things, and it's not they're not all equivalent. If you clear forest in the tropical region in the rainforest, but replant in a more temperate forest, the habitat will be different. The weather patterns that are influenced will be different. And so we need to make sure that understand those pledges and the impacts on those as well. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this first section around responsible forest management and its importance by talking about the case of keeping forest as the key role in responsible forest management. And while it's important that companies adopt a risk avoidance strategy to sourcing fiber, especially in the areas with high risk areas, companies don't need to stop using forest products. In fact, there are a lot of ways to do so responsibly, which I will pass the mic over to Tom to talk about how you can create increased demand for responsibly managed working forests through supporting those practices. So, Tom, I will
Excellent. Thank you, Alyssa. So I'm going to show my screen here. Make sure that that worked. Are you seeing the right slides there?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great, excellent. Well, yeah, thank you, Alyssa. I think that's a really good job of showing what the benefits are of responsible forest management. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about forest certification. It can be a rather large topic, but I think in the next 15 minutes or so here, we can give you a general overview of how forest certification works and how it promotes responsible forest management and answer some of your questions.
Tom, excuse me, I just want to interrupt. Can you expand your presentation or put it in presentation mode? Because we're also seeing your desktop. There you go.
Oh, okay. I thought I had that.
Thank you.
Okay. Are you still seeing the top part though there?
Yes.
Okay.
But the presentation itself is now in a larger format.
Okay. Let me see if I can go full screen. Sorry about that. It was working when we tested it before. There we go. That should be everything, right?
Yep. Great.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Roz. Again, yeah. So forest certification again is all about responsible forest management, and to sort of take a step back, forest certification really started in the 1990s, and it was really meant to answer two key questions that we'll kind of look at throughout this part of the presentation, which is how do we know that forests are being managed sustainably, and how can we responsibly source forest products? And that's really where forest certification came out of, is trying to really be able to answer those two questions. And more specifically, it came out of a lot of concern around tropical rainforests and in South America and Southeast Asia that were being cleared due to illegal logging, agriculture. So third-party forest certification became an important initiative really in the last 2 decades to offer a new mechanism to promote better forest management and a proof point that forests are being managed for economic, environmental, and social benefits. Excuse me. So there's lots of different types of forest certification, and some folks might feel like it's complex or confusing, but really, we can break it down into, I think, some bite-sized pieces here, so it's easier to understand. And really, there are 3 main types of third-party certification today that focus on different components of the fiber supply chain, and we'll work through each of those different components as we look at these types of forest certification. But the first one is forest management, so that's where you're actually certifying the forest. The second is chain of custody, which for those of you familiar with chain of custody, that really looks at transparency throughout the supply chain and tracks that forest management certification from the mill all the way to the consumer. And then fiber sourcing and controlled wood, which are newer than forest management and chain of custody, but they've been around for a good while now. That looks at how can we provide assurances around forests that are uncertified. And we know that just because a forest isn't uncertified in some cases doesn't mean it's not being managed sustainably, and this is a mechanism to try and address that. So we'll take a look at each of those here today. So first of all, forest management certification, that's kind of where it all starts. That's a system of inspecting and tracking timber, paper, pulp, and other forest products to make sure that they've been harvested according to a strict set of guidelines or standards. So that's really issued to the forest owner or the forest manager who is managing their forest according to the different standards that are set. And we'll look at each of those, some of the different standard setting organizations on the next slide. But really, at the end of the day, it's this third-party certification body that audits the land manager against the requirements in the standard to ensure that they're meeting the intent of those standards. So those landowners and land managers have gone through a successful audit, can then make a claim that their forest has been certified to those standards, and then sell logs from their land as certified. And the three main forest certification programs in North America are the Sustainable Forest Initiative, the Forest Stewardship Council, and the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, PEFC, which is based in Europe. And all of these have forest management certification standards, and they work according to a set of objectives and operating principles. They're similar but different. They have different philosophies, some different organizational differences, but essentially, they are trying to meet the same goals. And we'll take a look at some of the differences between the different standards, but these are really the main ones that are being used for forest management in North America. Globally, you have two umbrella organizations that do certification. That is PEFC and FSC. PEFC will endorse a number of different regional or country-specific standards, like the SFI, which is most prevalent in North America. ATFS, which is the American Tree Farm System, and that's based in the US and really looks at family-owned forests. There's a PEFC Canada, which endorses the CSA, which is the Canadian Standard Association. Really the point here isn't to go through all the different standards that are out there, but to say that PEFC is one of the global labels that you'll see that doesn't go out and do the audits or certifying themselves, but they endorse the standards in different regions around the world. So there's 53 other countries outside the United States and Canada that they endorse. And then FSC, they have different regional offices around the world. So you have, if you go to the FSC site in the United States or FSC Canada, there are differences regionally to that FSC principles and standards. And they have 45 regional offices around the globe as well. So when we talk about global certification, PEFC and FSC are the ones that we most commonly talk about. SFI, just a side point, is the largest certification program in North America, and they account for nearly 40% of all of the PEFC certifications worldwide. And again, not to throw more confusion into this, but I'm sure some of you are thinking they've seen forests or different labels that are certified to multiple standards, and that is in fact true. Forests can be and are very often certified to multiple standards. Another, I think, important point to think about around forest certification. It's a excellent tool, and it's very effective. Over the last 20 years, all these programs have really evolved to do some really incredible work. But the intent originally was concerned around tropical forests in South America and Southeast Asia and other high-risk areas around the world. But for a number of reasons, which we can get into during the Q&A, most of the certified forests around the globe are actually in the areas with low risk. And again, there's a number of reasons why the uptake has been better in those areas. But it's just important to note that in North America and Europe, there's very strong legal frameworks, a lot of sustainable industry practices already in place, and that's where we've actually had the most growth around certified forest land in North America and Europe. So it's still growing in the areas of high risk, but to date, this is where it's about half of certified land is in North America and Europe. So after forest management, we have chain of custody. So chain of custody certification is an accounting system that will track responsibly managed fiber from those forests all the way through the production and manufacturing to the end product. So what it functions as is a way to track material from certified forests to, again, to the end product. So brands can actually then use that chain of custody certification to not just track, but also communicate how much of their product came from those certified lands. So another way to take a look at it here is on the diagram you see here, you have your forest management certification, which certifies the forest, but what chain of custody does is really takes that forest management certification and brings it through the process to the retailer. So each supply chain player must actually be certified under chain of custody, whether it's the factory, the processor, the sawmill. Since at any of these points, a controversial source might be reintroduced to the mix. So they want to make sure that they can track that all the way through and make sure all of those links remain intact to keep that chain of custody certification. So all of the programs, SFI, FSC, PFC, they all offer both forest management certification and chain of custody certification. So again, the goal here just to emphasize is that the chain of custody is really about that supply chain traceability. When you see a reference to or a label around chain of custody. And again, that benefit is really it allows brands and retailers to have that on package labeling if they have that chain of custody certificate. Another, again, I'm kind of getting to the weeds here a bit. So I just want to mention now, how does the chain of custody, work? These are big complex supply chains. You're taking material from all over the world. There's really two main ways that organizations can track that, and both FSC and SFI do both. That's the percentage method, which allows the holder to label or make claims on all of their products. If an organization knows they've got, for example, 50% certified content, they can make claims based on that percentage and make a 50% claim. Or the credit method, which is a way to allow the chain of custody certificate holder to make claims about the output that corresponds to the percentage of certified content. So if the organization knows they have the number of credits, they can then allocate those credits with the products that they manufacture. So there's the percentage method and the credit method, which are two different ways of doing that. Again, both FSC and SFI use both, and there's benefits, advantages to both. So we took a little bit thinking about those three different types of certification. The other one I wanted to make sure we covered today was controlled wood or what's called fiber sourcing. So chain of custody, again, tracks that can track recycled content as well. We're going to go to recycled content in the third portion of our discussion today. But in addition to tracking responsibly sourced fiber from forests that are certified, chain of custody can actually track fiber from from forests that are uncertified. Looking at the uncertified fiber and how that tracks into chain of custody certifications is a question we get a lot, and I want to go through that as well. So quick little quiz here. What percentage of forests do you think around the world are certified? So like everybody kind of a second there to take a look. 5%, 12%, 22%, or 51%. The answer might actually surprise you. About 12% of forests globally are certified. So that leaves a lot of forests around the world that are not certified. Not all of these are working forests per se. That means forests that are being used for pulp and paper and other uses. But it just does give you a sense that overall there isn't a lot of certified forests around the world to track that fiber. So there's a number of reasons for that, and I think an important question is, does that mean that if a forest isn't certified, that for some reason that forest isn't being managed sustainably? And the answer is, of course, it depends. So what controlled wood and fiber sourcing does is allows us to sort of take a look at a third main type of certification, where the manufacturer, when they're procuring the wood from a non-certified forest, they have different mechanisms so that they can make sure that it's not necessarily a certified forest, but that it's a non-controversial forest. And there's a number of ways that FSC and SFI do this, and it's been a really successful, important program. But again, for the reason that there's a lot of forests that are not certified, even here in the United States. And a reason for that is that a lot of our forests in the United States, actually 50% of the fiber that flows into our different products comes from family-owned forests. So you can see on this map here, which is one of my favorite graphics here, shows you where forests are in the United States, and then also shows you who owns those forests around the U.S. So the green there is family-owned forests. So these are, sometimes, 1,000, 500, 100 acres or less. These aren't large industrial scale, privately owned forests, state or federal forests. These are really small plots of land, and we're going to take a deeper look into that family forest owner here on the next slide. There's over 10 million of these family forest owners. Again, about 43% of the forest in the United States is owned by these families, but less than 1% of these forests are certified. And the reasons are many, but for a lot of them, they don't really consider themselves in the forest products industry. They own the land as a vacation home or something as an investment to help pay for college or a house later on in life. They don't really consider their forest land as somehow, part of the pulp and paper industry. They might only sell their logs, once or twice in their lifetimes. So they don't have as many incentives necessarily to certify their lands, but that doesn't mean that their land isn't being managed sustainably. So what the controlled wood and fiber sourcing programs do is they look at these uncertified forests and they use a different set of standards to ensure that that material is not from controversial sources. So again, it's not the same as forest management certification, but they do have different mechanisms in place to make sure that there's nothing going on with illegal logging, deforestation. They still take a look at water quality. They do logger training. They do lots of different outreach to landowners. So there's lots of benefits from this. And in areas of low risk, such as the United States and Canada, a fiber sourcing or controlled wood standards that can actually be really effective. And it's actually can be part of the chain of custody as well. So once at the time of procurement at the land, that manufacturing facility can use a fiber sourcing or controlled wood to help, again, make sure that fiber is not coming from controversial sources. And these main programs are FSC controlled wood, SF5 fiber sourcing standard, and then PEFC also has a controlled sources program as well. So just taking a quick look here at some of the differences or similarities between these different fiber sourcing standards. So SFI actually just updated theirs in 2022 here, so it's brand new. And again, if you take a look, at their website and get into sort of the details, it's really looking at things like measures to broaden biodiversity, best management practices to protect water quality, training harvesting professionals, doing forestry research, landowner outreach, and avoiding controversial sources. So it's been updated. It's a very a comprehensive survey, again, when they're harvesting that wood to make sure that that they're doing no harm. And again, I would recommend anybody who's interested in learning more to go to SFI and get the updates on the fiber sourcing standard. The other one that, again, it gets discussed a lot in North America here is the FSC controlled wood standard. So that requires that certificate holders that use that wood are able to, again, sort of get those proof points that are similar to fiber sourcing as well. Again, legal harvesting, traditional civil rights, forests with high conservation values, and that also can be used in the FSC mixed label. We'll take a look at some of these different labels, but again, if we were looking at the sort of the main types of forest certification, you've got forest management, chain of custody, and then these different programs for that uncertified fiber. So FSC has their version of this, which is called controlled wood. What I think an important point to make about controlled wood as well is that FSC has a national risk assessment. And that allows you to take a look at most of the fiber, which is low risk in this national risk assessment. But there are areas in North America that do have some types of risk. And what the controlled wood standard does is if you're sourcing from that area, and if you go to the website, again, you'll get all kinds of information. This is sort of the high level view of the areas in the United States where there is a potential for risk. It's not to say that these areas are all high risk. They're just areas where there could be some special biodiversity areas, old growth forests, priority forest types, etc. So the starting place here is to kind of take a look at if you're sourcing from these areas, if the forest is not certified, you can refer to the FSC National Risk Assessment, and the website here is at the top, and for controlled wood. And again, that allows you to take a look at a lot of the different information that goes into this. So that's an important thing to mention about controlled wood as well. Quickly here, just to sort of emphasize that point again, there's different ways to get a certified product, right? So number one, we looked at forest management certified fiber. So the chain of custody will take that forest management certification all the way through the supply chain there to make it to a certified product. But you also have uncertified forests, which we looked at controlled fiber and fiber sourcing. That's another way to find a label and have a certified product at the end. And then the third one is recycled fiber, which we're gonna hand it off back to Alyssa here in a second, and she's gonna take a look at the importance and benefits of recycled fiber as a source of responsibly managed fiber for packaging and other paper products. This is just a look at all the labels. Hopefully they seem less confusing now that we've gone through sort of this quick introduction into a forest certification. But you can see with the FSC ones, we have the forest management chain of custody certification, which is 100% from well-managed forests, the recycled label, and then also the mix, which can be fiber from recycled and from certified forest and or from controlled wood. SFI, similar, we have chain of custody labels for them for sustainable forestry, certified sourcing, which is the fiber sourcing controlled wood label for them. And they also have a mixed label too of there where you can have certified forest content, certified sourcing, and recycled content. And of course, PFC, who endorses a number of these different labels, they have a recycled and a certified label as well. So last but not least, this is a question I get all the time, so I just want to address it here while we're having this presentation. But inevitably we get the question that says, which forest certification program is better? And at Green Blue and the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, we are an inclusive organization. So we would normally say that we're inclusive of all of the different certification programs. But we've really kind of updated some of that communication, recently, because I would want to make the point that all of these are actually great forest certification programs. They're doing, again, the landowner outreach, protecting biodiversity. There's grants that are being given from these organizations. They're collecting data and doing a lot of analysis. So it's not much of which one's better. I think they're all fantastic organizations. They've evolved a lot in the last 20 years. And it's really, I think, different philosophies, different benefits that it's really up to each organization or person to make that determination for themselves. And I would recommend reaching out to these organizations if you have questions. They're very, very willing and happy to talk to folks about their programs at FSC, SFI, Tree Farm, and PEFC. Excellent. Well, I am going to pass it over to Alyssa here. I just wanted to make one last point. This is sort of taking a look at a landscape-based model for assuring responsible forest management, just to kind of give you a sense of some of the different tools that are out there. There's forest certification, and there's a lot of data analysis going on the ground as well. This is called Forest in Focus, which we'll send you some more information about. And then the resource that's available for download here is the guide to verifying responsible sourcing of fiber. So the link that you see there on the slide at sustainablepackaging.org/resources. This is a guide that we've developed within the SPC to help organizations and different companies kind of walk through the process of what responsible sourcing looks like, from what kind of questions to ask your suppliers to looking at the different certification programs. So with that, I'm going to pass it over back to Alyssa. And again, thank you all for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. There's always so much that I learn, even though I have heard this presentation so many times every time we go through the certification section. Can you make me the presenter?
Yes, I'm doing that right here. And there you go, Alyssa.
All right. All right, can you see the slide?
Yep.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we're going to close. I'm going to be brief so that we have time to get to your questions. But the final bit that we're going to talk about in terms of responsible fiber sourcing is recycled fiber as an option. So as Tom discussed when talking about certification and verification, there are many different ways of approaching fiber sourcing responsibly. An additional manner when you move beyond looking for virgin fiber, though, is looking for recycled fiber. Recycled fiber is a pathway that does not directly contribute to forest loss because the fiber is already in the market, so it's contributing to keeping that fiber in use as long as possible. So it's one important thing to note, though, is that efficient collection and reprocessing of fiber through the recycling system is not a replacement to sourcing fiber. It is a complement, as we'll touch later on. Fiber is not endlessly recyclable or infinitely recyclable. It does break down. So this is just a complementary pathway, not a substitute pathway for sourcing responsibly grown and managed virgin fiber. So recycled fiber is often blended with virgin fiber in packaging applications. The reasons for this range from fiber supply in given regions to the needs of the specific packages and the packaging applications. However, it's also very common for fiber packaging to include at least some recycled fiber, even if most of it is virgin fiber. But the quantity and the quality depend on a few things, which we'll discuss in detail before questions. So first, for the quantity, it's the quantity of fiber that's available to use. So if it's not collected, it can't be used. Paper has an overall high recovery rate in the United States. So a lot of the post-consumer fiber is recovered and made available for other uses, more so than a lot of other packaging materials. As shown in the graph, most of the recovered fiber is corrugated board and paperboard containers, but there are other types like mixed paper and newspaper that have a little bit lower recovery rates. Overall, the average recovery rate is 72%. And it's important to note that the recovery rate for paper produced is never going to be 100% because some paper is in more durable applications like books or other things that people aren't disposing of as frequently. So it's not as simple as everything that's produced can be brought back in that same year or cycle. There are some variabilities in what paper products can be collected for recycling. So then this recovered fiber is then reused at varying percentages in various packaging applications. The amount depends. Some container board is made from fully recycled fiber, but oftentimes it's blended with virgin fiber to get the performance qualities that are required. So when companies use recycled content in their products, it helps create a demand pull to keep the recycling system strong. These end markets are a key source of demand to improve the system and recover more. And paper especially is often one of the strong drivers of the recycling stream, and a strong paper recycling market can help support some of the other material markets that might not be as strong at the moment. Paper can help support those, and it creates that demand pull in the system. So there's also quality concerns when thinking about recycled fiber. So the properties of recycled fibers change with each reuse cycle in ways that affect their strength. The fibers shorten after being repeatedly cut and broken down through repulping, and during the drying process, the fiber cell walls collapse, which alters their bonding capacity and flexibility, which can result in cracking of the fibers under pressure. So recycled fibers are therefore on average shorter and weaker than virgin fiber. Also, the strength characteristics of the paper that's made from recycled fiber depends a lot on the technology available at the paper mill that the fiber is sourced from. Not every pulp and paper mill has the same equipment and the same capacity to process high volumes of recycled content into high quality paper. So the availability can depend on what mills you can work with. The physical degradation of length and strength limits the amount of time fiber can be recycled. After being recycled about 5 to 7 times on average, the fiber can no longer be reused. Thus, new virgin fibers are needed in the paper stream to replace the unusable fibers that have been recycled their 5 to 7 times and wash out during the repulping process. So a single sheet of paper therefore contains oftentimes new fibers as well as recycled fibers that have been recycled many times, not just one or the other. And so as you can see in the graphic, the cycle that fiber goes through when being made into paper or other fiber-based products, there is always going to be a need for some input of new fiber because there will always be some discard or a fiber that cannot be reused as paper. So there will need to be some new fiber to meet demand. So the feasibility of incorporating recycled fiber into various packaging applications depends a lot on the grade of paper required, which I'm sure many of you know very well. And there are some applications that recycled fiber is better or easier to use than others. And so this is an important thing to consider depending on what your desired final application is. Different percentages of recycled fiber might be available to you. So this was a very, very brief overview of recycled fiber and some of the considerations in recycling as far as a responsible source. We're going to briefly wrap up just by touching on some of the corporate goals or how those might be structured in this area, as many people also set, just like they set zero deforestation goals, set recycling goals. So many companies have commitments to responsible forest management to source from certified forests and to use recycled fiber. Some companies express a preference, but most corporate goals discuss both options as both are responsible fiber sources. And so it provides flexibility in being able to meet the demand while maintaining a strong ethical framework for supporting or the types of practices that the company wants to support. So it's important that when you're writing goals to make sure that the intended impact is actually addressed by the goal. So if you're working on the intention of reducing deforestation, goals that include recycled content or certified fiber or verified fiber, those could all make sense. If the goal is to promote responsible forest management through certification, then your goal should be specifically around certification. If your goal is to strengthen the recycling system, then your goal can be and should be around recycled content, but all of these can fit into broad goals around responsible sourcing. It's just important to make sure that whatever your intention is on what you're working towards is actually met by the goals that we set. So I'm gonna end with some of the key takeaways before going to questions. Responsible forest management supports companies through environmental, social, and access to fiber by keeping the forest healthy and able to produce these services. Sourcing policies should avoid controversial sources of fiber that contribute to deforestation. High-risk countries should be verified. Consider forest certification systems as a key tool, but also remember that many forests are not certified, so there are other standards and programs that can also help you source responsibly. Incorporate recycled fiber into best use applications in your packaging, and make sure all of your packaging is also recyclable to help maintain the available supply of fiber for future use. And then develop corporate goals to scale up your sustainable fiber sourcing with support from some of these resources that we've shared today. So there are many options available to you for responsible fiber sourcing. Hope you've learned more about the difference and the considerations between certified, controlled, and recycled fiber. Ultimately, the balance that works best for you is up to your organization, but hopefully we've given you the tools and through the handout, some resources in helping you get there. So we'll end by thanking the sponsors again for allowing this presentation to be brought to each of the attendees without charge. And we would also, as the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, like to thank you for your attention. So with that, we have time for some questions.
Thank you so much, Alyssa and Tom. Really great information. So a couple of questions. And when you hear these questions, think about the label industry, since this is most of the people attending are from the label industry. Regarding chain of custody certification, which types of firms have to be part of that chain of custody and hold a license or a certificate, and which are exempt from need as fiber passes through the entire supply chain to the end use, which would be application by the brand?
Yeah, is to keep track of that certificate all the way through. It might depend if there might be some exceptions to different supply chains, but everything from the converter to the printer, the manufacturer, when that they say stump to shelf a lot of times with chain of custody. So each time that passes through the supply chain, that certificate needs to be transferred, and both SFI and FSC have different tools and mechanisms, online resources to make sure that number, that certificate number is being tracked throughout the supply chain. So does that answer your question, Roz? Were there certain exceptions that maybe you're thinking of, or?
The one thing that I'm familiar with is that when the labels are printed and die cut, that is part of the chain of custody. Then those labels get sent off with a release liner from which they will be applied to a brand that will, or a co-packer or something that will apply those labels onto the container. But I know, at least in FSC, that release liner is just considered a vehicle for transportation.
Okay.
So the brand doesn't actually need to be part of the chain of custody, since they're just applying the label. Does that make sense to you?
To that package. Yeah, no, that does. I knew when you were asked that question that you probably had a good example or of where that might occur. But I think that makes total sense, and that's exactly right.
Okay. And another one with, there's so much EPR legislation happening around the country. We've got 2 states now that have laws in place. How do you predict that EPR adoption will affect forest certification demand relative to recycled demand in paper or paperboard, those types of products?
That's a great question. I'll let Alyssa go first, and then I can give my 2 cents. But that's a great question.
Great. So to be brief, you're right that there's 2 states that have passed EPR programs. Colorado, actually yesterday, their legislature sent to the governor an EPR bill that is for packaging and paper products, printed paper products. So this is an area that I think there will be a lot of movement in the next years as these programs come online. The Colorado one is not officially law yet, but there's no indication that the governor at this point is planning to veto. But I think there'll be a lot of movement in looking at things like certification as a way to align some of the expectations for what is responsible practice.
Great, thank you. And then just one follow-up to the previous question about who's in the chain of custody. Would a trucker require chain of custody, a merchant selling a product, a co-packer applying the label? I mean, my initial thought would be no, but what do you think?
Well, with controlled wood, so this might be kind of a nuance, but like controlled wood or fiber sourcing, it does require logger training. So that would include, usually the logger is the one that's through the trucking. I mean, I know there, again, there's exceptions to this as well, but in that example, there is logger training that is part of the requirements for the controlled wood or for the fiber sourcing. But with some of those other exceptions that you're talking about, I need to, we'd have to look at each, case by case. But in general, that would be correct. That as long as that fiber is being tracked throughout, again, the printer, the converter, every time that is going through a manufacturing process to make sure that chain of custody isn't broken, that needs to follow all the way to the end package. So I think the examples that you use there, would be, folks who are kind of transporting it, throughout, that wouldn't necessarily need to be part of that chain of custody, as long as that fiber has been tracked. And again, it isn't the specific fiber, you can't, because even when the logs go to the mill, it's being mixed in with all kinds of other logs and wood chips or pulpers, whatever. So that's why I did want to mention the credit and percentage system. That's how it's really you're tracking that fiber throughout the supply chain there. So hopefully that answers your question, Roz.
No, very helpful. Thank you. All right, we are at time, and I would like to thank you both again very much, and thank you to our sponsors, and have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind.